For women are always aliens in the patriarchal system, always invisible, unheard. They are always the other. Though generally called sexism, this is actually internal colonialism, that is, colonialism directed inside the society itself. This must be criticized deeper and deeper. But I encountered the same attitude against matriarchal cultures, the same fragmentation and distortion in anthropological research on this topic. Therefore, the criticism of patriarchal ideology was now aimed against external colonialism, that is, colonialism directed outside of society. This exploitative combination of imperialism, racism, and sexism that made indigenous peoples on every continent into the others, unseen and unheard. This alienation was even worse for matriarchal peoples. Just as the female half of humanity does not exist in patriarchal Western philosophy, matriarchally organized societies and cultures also do not exist in that ideology. They never have. Nevertheless, thanks to the method of ideological criticism of patriarchy, I found, and you too, we found abundant evidence of the existence of matriarchal societies, and little by little, a completely different perspective of society and history came to light, based on a completely different set of values, the matriarchy paradigm. During the last decade, modern matriarchal studies were presented to a wider public at 3 large conferences. Lydia already spoke about it. In 2003, the first World Congress on Modern Matriarchal Studies, Societies in Balance, took place in Luxembourg, Europe. It brought together for the first time scholars from across the world who have up to now been working on this issue in relative isolation. After that, I was invited to bring this new field of modern matriarchal studies to the US and to guide the second World Congress on Matriarchal Studies, Societies of Peace, which was held 2005 in San Marcos, Texas. This time, it brought together indigenous researchers from some of the world's still existing matriarchal societies. They spoke not only about the matriarchal patterns their societies have preserved, but also about the many problems that colonization and missionization and now globalization have caused to their communities. The third large Congress on Matriarchal Studies and Politics, titled "The Time is Ripe," was held in May 2011 in Switzerland. Western and indigenous researchers and activists again met to seek ways, based on findings of the earlier conferences, to make matriarchal wisdom and ways of life fruitful for the present. A variety of practical examples were presented from the feminist movement and other alternative movements that exhibit matriarchal values and approximate matriarchal patterns. Now, the fourth point, the matriarchal paradigm. What does it mean? In that way, together with excellent and committed researchers from all over the world, the paradigm given by modern matriarchal studies is developed further. The scope of the matriarchal paradigm is huge. It encompasses not only all of the known history and the various forms of society that exist today, but it also touches on the content of all cultural and social sciences. I will outline it here. In the first step toward developing the matriarchal paradigm or theory of matriarchal societies, an overview of the previous research on matriarchy must be presented and critically revised. By following the course of this research has taken up till now, the lack of a clear and complete definition of matriarchy, as well as of a good interdisciplinary methodology and a consistent theoretical framework, becomes obvious. Furthermore, most of the early and contemporary writings about matriarchy are riddled with patriarchal ideology. In the second step, the complete structural definition of matriarchy must be formulated. To achieve this, the first place within the systematic arrangement of disciplines is that of anthropology. Therefore, I started with it in my research for the last decades. The reason is that history of cultures will not, by itself, yield a complete definition of matriarchy. History deals only with the traces and fragments of former societies, which is not enough to form an overall picture. Though these fragments are unquestionably numerous and may well be extremely important, they can give us only sketchy information. Historical research alone cannot reveal how matriarchal people thought or felt, or how they organized themselves socially and politically, how their society as a whole was structured. In a sense, my new book, Matriarchal Society, Studies on Indigenous Cultures Across the Globe, in a sense, it was published in German from 1988 till 2000 and is now here in English. It inaugurated the matriarchal paradigm because it fulfills these first and second steps towards the development of a matriarchal paradigm, which has been the basis of a matriarchal paradigm. This work has been the basis for the 3 large congresses on modern matriarchal studies. In the first step, the book briefly outlines the history of research on matriarchy in its various contexts and academic disciplines. And in the second step, which is much more important, the complete and detailed structural definition of matriarchy is given. Based on my case-by-case cross-cultural research, I have elaborated the structures and guidelines that function across all levels of matriarchal or mother-centered society. This has been done by investigating and presenting most of the still existing matriarchal societies across the continents of Asia, South and North America, and Africa, which exhibit a fascinating richness of matriarchal forms and patterns. This part has already been done, and in this part of my research I included a lot of wonderful research of indigenous and non-indigenous researchers who did this work before me, but I put it in this theoretical framework. Now, let's continue with the matriarchal paradigm. In the third step, this structural definition of matriarchy, which is detailed elaborated in my book, can be used as a scientific tool to rewrite the cultural history of humankind. This history reaches back much further than the 5,000 or 6,000 years of patriarchy. You know, during the longest periods of history, non-patriarchal cultures arose in which women created the institutions, practices, and structures that constitute culture. They embodied the center of society, integrating all the other members. Extant matriarchal societies are the most recent examples. Such an immense task obviously cannot be completed without a good theory of matriarchy. This is the only defense against anachronistic fantasy projections still so common around this topic. By overcoming the distortions wrought by patriarchal prejudice, a new interpretation of human history can unfold. And we are all on the way. Maria Gimbutas gave a wonderful part of this, and I heard and know about these excellent goddess scholars here who do the same. This is on the way. Now, but matriarchal paradigm is not finished with that. Let's go on. In the fourth step, the problem of the rise and development of patriarchy has to be solved. Two important questions have to be answered. How could patriarchal patterns have developed in the first place? And how could they have spread all over the world? The answer to this latter problem is by no means obvious. And in my opinion, neither question has been sufficiently answered as yet. We have only parts of this explanation, but it's not completed. For to explain the development of patriarchy, we must at first have a clear knowledge about the form of society that existed before it arose, which is matriarchy. Secondly, a theory of patriarchy's origin must explain how and why patriarchal patterns emerged in different places, on different continents, at different times, under different conditions. This is a huge task, and the answers will be very different for the diverse regions of the world. So, any simplistic theory is not helpful here. In the fifth step, a deep analysis of the history of patriarchy must be developed. Until now, this history has been recorded as one of domination. History from the perspective of the dominators at the top. But there is also the completely different perspective from the bottom. This is the history of women, of the lower classes, of indigenous peoples. The history of subcultures and marginalized cultures. The existence of this history shows that patriarchy did not succeed in destroying the ancient and long-lasting matriarchal traditions on all continents. In the final analysis, the patriarchy lives like a parasite on these traditions. But we can recognize this only with the help of the structural definition and theory of matriarchy. If we can follow the traces back through the history of patriarchy and to connect them, we will accomplish nothing less than regaining our full heritage. So, the theory of matriarchal societies shows the scope of the matriarchal paradigm, or of modern matriarchal studies. Ongoing important research has been included in this framework and will continue to be in future. In this way, I hope that generations of researchers will work creatively with the matriarchal paradigm as long as it takes until this new worldview became parts of public consciousness. Point 5, matriarchal politics. Do you want to hear it?
Yes.
Not too long?
No.
All right, I try my best to be short. When it becomes part of the public consciousness, then the world can be changed by developing new matriarchal patterns. For this is not only a matter of theory, but also a matter of practice, and this we call matriarchal politics. I will give you now only some suggestions and ideas of matriarchal politics very briefly.